Before I start fishing this line all the way from the compressor to the rear bumper, what I thought I'd do is actually unravel it, obviously, and at least put one of the fittings on so it's easier and I can show you from the garage. Now, you can usually put these guys on in tight spaces. It's not that hard. You don't really need too many tools, just a couple wrenches, but let me show you. You want to make sure that your hose is the same size as your fittings. And in my case, both of these guys are -6. So let's open it up and take a look. So this is the -6 AN fitting. As you can see, there's one side that screws into the compressor fitting that we have, and the other side is for the hose to go in. So how you put these guys together is relatively simple. First, you want to unhook the bit that goes into the hose. Once you take the fitting apart, we're going to have to put the red side onto the hose. So first, let's take off this tape. So there's a reason why this tape is here. It's to prevent the braid from fraying. Now we got to tuck in the hose into the little fitting end. And make sure we tuck in all the little loose braids or the frays. And usually they're pretty tight, but you can get it with your hand most of the time. Just kind of continuously screwing it on usually seems like a good bet. So I don't know if you guys can see in there, but you can kind of see the hose started to go in, but it's not close enough. We want the hose butt up against the end of the threads right here on the inside. So I'm going to try to push it in a little bit more and see what happens. After a little bit of persuasion, I finally got the hose kind of where I want it. You can see on the inside, it is butt up against those threads right there. So I would say the hose is that far in now. Before it was just down here. And I think that should be good enough. What we're going to have to do now is put the fitting back together, meaning screwing the blue part back into the red part. But because now that there is a rubber hose in there, what I usually like to do is put a tiny little bit of grease. Any type of grease is fine, wheel bearing grease, whatever, what have you, anything like that. And that way it slides in a little bit easier. So let's see if we can get this guy threaded at least. So now looks like the blue part is starting to thread on the red part. You want to keep an eye on the red part of the fitting. It doesn't slip back out off of the hose, because that sometimes does that when you're tightening it down. So once you get it pretty tight, you want to use one of these guys, which is a AN fitting wrench. You can use a regular wrench as well, but a regular wrench usually mars up the finish on your AN fitting. So ideally you would want to have two, but I only have one, so regular wrench on the other side. And then I'm just holding the back right here with my thumb on the left hand, just to feel that if it's slipping out for whatever reason, I can stop and readjust everything. Now we have the fitting correctly installed onto the braided line, and just to give it a quick test, it didn't fall out. It should never fall out when you're giving it a light tug like this. If it falls out, it could be one of two reasons. One, you didn't get the hose far enough into the red part of the fitting, or two, when you were screwing the blue part in, it pushed the hose back out. That usually happens if you don't put any grease on the tip of the blue part right here. So if you have to do it again, I recommend a little bit of grease. That way it'll slide in a lot easier. Notice I only installed one side of the fitting. The other end down here somewhere is still just the braided line. Now there is a reason for that. So what I'm going to do next is hook up this side to the compressor, run the hose all the way to the back bumper from the compressor, and then when I get there, I'll probably, I hope, I have a little bit of slack left over where I can cut to length and then install the fitting at that time. So let's get to it. So you can see this is my fitting right here. Pro tip, if you don't want your AN fitting really scuffed up while you yank the line through, wrap it with some bubble wrap. Should screw in really nice like it's doing right now because everything is brand new. And with these AN fittings, get your wrench, put that on the fitting. All you want to do is tighten it maybe like another quarter turn, maybe even less, to where it's snug. Now if you over tighten these guys, they do not seal properly. They only need to be like maybe like an eighth of a turn over snug, and I think I have achieved that, so it's not going to come off anymore. I think we're okay. Now that we've got the braided hose tucked away underneath the Land Cruiser, away from anything hot or anything that's moving, it comes out right here. Luckily, I bought enough line. I think right here there's still about 4 feet left, but we only need it to go right here. This is where we drilled the hole earlier for the coupler. So before we cut this guy, we're going to mark off exactly where we need to cut. Of course, we're going to account for a tiny little bit of slack as well. We're going to put our little piece of duct tape to go all the way around the hose. So what I'll do is I'll usually cut right in the center of the duct tape. As you can see, I pulled some of the hose back out of the rear bumper. I had to cut a couple of the zip ties basically. The reason why I did that was so that I can have easy access to where the hose is going to need to be cut, and also when I push the fitting in, because remember, pushing the fitting in is not that fun. Anyways, let's cut this guy. To cut this hose very cleanly and easily, I use the cable cutters. Now I think I used these guys once before when I installed the dual battery system, hooking all the wires up, but this actually works really well with the braided hose as well. So here we go. Ta-da! And there we have a really clean cut. If you guys don't have this guy yet, I mean, any type of cable cutter will do. If anything, I'll leave a link in the description down below so you guys can grab this guy. Here comes the fun part once again. We gotta push this guy into the hose, but of course, let's take off the tape first. And what's nice about putting the tape on here is it helps with the hose when you cut it. It doesn't fray as much, so it's easier to push into the fitting. So there we go. And we are going to push this guy in. This is going to take a while, so I'll just cut to where I actually get this guy all the way in. Ta-da! All done. Now all we got to do is feed it back through the hole in the bumper and then connect it to the quick connect. Almost forgot, the AN line actually needs to go into this adapter before it can attach to the coupler right here. So what I'm going to do is put some Teflon tape around this guy, put it into position, held on by this guy in the back, and then hook up the line behind that. So now that everything is in place, before I put the auxiliary battery back in, I want to check this location for leaks. So let's turn on the compressor. So the system turned on and then off, which is a good sign. That means the system is holding pressure. Now I have some soapy water, basically Simple Green. I'm gonna spray it in here, It's kind of where all the fittings are, and watch for bubbles. So it looks like we've got some leakage right here. I probably need to either tighten it more or re-Teflon that piece. The annoying part is I have to take out the other fittings as well, but it's not too bad. So let me check the rear just in case and make sure that there's no leaks. So I don't know if you guys can see that clearly on the GoPro, but spray some soap. And it looks like the rear is okay. There is no bubbles coming from the rear fittings. Let's make sure there's nothing coming out of this one either. This one looks just fine. So the only one that I have to worry about is the one in the front. Let me go ahead and tighten that guy up and check it again. So I actually had to take a lot of these fittings back apart to get them cleaned up, re-Tefloned, and then tightened again. And then now, if I spray the soapy water on there, you can see there is no more bubbling. I did notice, however, on this little valve, if I go too far back, you can hear it leak a little bit. So just have it directly straight and it should be fine. I don't think that's going to be something that bothers me, mainly because I'm just going to have this guy open most of the time, unless, of course, something happens to the line going to the back. But yeah, I think we should be good now. And next, we're going to put the battery back in. So here we go. We have the battery installed back into the Land Cruiser, and like I thought, the space is adequate for everything. The only thing that was a little bit tight, and you guys can see right there, is the little valve. So what I had to do was turn the negative terminal slightly, and it cleared the valve. So now when I use the valve, I can still turn it to the off position and also the on position. And now for a test run. Ta-da! So now that we know everything works, we have this guy to put on. One last piece. Now, I've never played with this guy yet. Hopefully, I don't need to take the whole coupler back out to get it in there, but we shall see. This looks like it goes in. Where's it go? Maybe right there in that groove. Yeah, so it goes into the groove and then caps off, I think, like that. Pretty sweet design. And that is done. Obviously, we've still got the one in the front. Let's go put that in. There we go. All done. Ooh, ice cream truck. And that is it, guys. Now I have access to my compressor from the back of the Land Cruiser. A couple of quick tips and things to look out for. Tip number one, make sure you have some soapy water on hand to check for leaks. Now, you guys saw in the video when I did my first attempt, there was a leak in one of the T-fittings, and I had to take it apart and redo it. Second time around, everything worked out just fine. Tip number two, try to use as few fittings as possible. Remember, every additional fitting you put on there is one extra point of possible leaks. Now, for me, I had to put a bunch of different fittings on there because the space was just so tight in between the air compressor and the second battery itself. But if you, let's say you're putting it into your Land Cruiser, you don't have the second battery in there, I think like you could do maybe like 3 less fittings, easy. And then one last thing that I noticed, when the compressor is on and there is pressure in the lines, the couplers are rather difficult to engage and disengage. So what I would recommend is before you air up the line, make sure you have whatever hose or air chuck that you want to use already hooked up. That way you won't have to force it in against all that air pressure. What do you guys think? Do you think having easy access to your air compressor is worth all the trouble that I just went through? Are there any other options? Leave a comment down below. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button, and for more Land Cruiser and Overland content just like this, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.